Perfect. Thank you so much. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, good morning and thank you for the invitation to speak about Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regime, hereafter referred to as the regime. In the context of the parliamentary review of the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering and Terrorist Financial Act, or the PCMLTFA for short, I would like to start my remarks by briefly outlining the state of money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada and explain why it's important to address these serious crimes. I also plan to explain the regime, the role of the PCM, of the Act itself, and the many regime partners working on the financial crime in Canada. I would further situate my remarks in the context of the important recent international and domestic reviews of Canada's regime.
Are serious financial crimes that pose real threats to the safety of Canadians and the integrity of Canada's financial system. Financial crime is not a victimless crime. It affects our society by supporting, rewarding, and perpetuating broader criminal and terrorist activities in Canada. The proceeds of crime being laundered in Canada are generated through predicate crimes such as cyber fraud, automotive theft, human and drug trafficking, including from fentanyl, which has killed many Canadians. Money laundering can also affect affordability by driving up prices in sectors where it is present. For example, the expert panel on money laundering appointed by the Government of British Columbia estimated that money laundering in BC's real estate sector raised housing prices by approximately 5% in 2018. Terrorist financing supports the activities of domestic and international terrorists, including deadly and destructive attacks in Canada and abroad. The complex efforts criminals employ to disguise the proceeds of crime make the scope of money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada difficult to estimate. That being said, in 2021, a report by the Criminal Intelligence Service of Canada estimated that between $45 billion and $113 billion Canadian are laundered in Canada each year. Canada maintains an extensive regime to detect, deter, and disrupt financial crimes. The regime consists of 13 departments and agencies, each with their respective mandates, led by the Department of Finance. The regime is established by federal statutes, including the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act and the Criminal Code. The PCMLTFA is an essential component of Canada's regime. The Act establishes the Financial Transactions and Report Analysis Centre of Canada, or FINTRAC, as it's more commonly known, or le CANF in French, as Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regulator and financial intelligence unit, and defines its operations. It also requires financial institutions and designated non-financial businesses and professions to report certain financial transactions to FINTRAC, have compliance and training programs in place, and identify clients and keep records. Collectively, businesses subject to the PCMLTFA and its regulations are known as reporting entities. There are over 24,000 reporting entities that play a critical frontline role in efforts to prevent and detect money laundering and terrorist financing in Canada. Reporting entities include banks, credit unions, casinos, real estate professionals, money services businesses, accountants, dealers in precious metals and stones, and the armored car sector as well. Le régime canadien repose sur trois piliers.
Canada's regime operates based on three interdependent pillars. The Department of Finance's role aligns with the first pillar, policy and coordination. The department is responsible for leading the assessment of money laundering and terrorist financing risks and developing and coordinating domestic and international policy. Other regime partners also play an important role in informing and developing policy, including public safety, justice, global affairs, innovation, science, and economic development Canada. FINTRAC's role aligns with the second pillar of the regime, prevention and detection, as it is responsible for promoting, supervising, and enforcing anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing compliance, and collecting, analyzing, and disseminating financial and other intelligence. The third pillar, investigation and disruption, involves identifying, investigating, prosecuting, and sanctioning money laundering and terrorist financing offenses. The federal agencies, including the RCMP, the CPSA, the CRA, the CSIS rather, and the Public Prosecution Service of Canada are responsible for implementing the third pillar. While the regime as a whole falls under federal jurisdiction, there are many areas of shared jurisdiction with the provinces and territories. Provinces and municipal law enforcement bodies, provincial crown attorneys' offices or prosecution services, civil forfeiture offices, and provincial regulators play important roles in combating money laundering and terrorist financing.
Subject of a number of domestic and international reviews in recent years. These reviews found that Canada's regime generally has a strong legal framework, but achieving operational effectiveness remains a persistent challenge. Other criticism of Canada's regime include challenges in the ability to use financial intelligence, ensure transparency of legal persons and arrangements, successfully investigate and prosecute money laundering, and deprive criminals of the proceeds of crime. The government acknowledges these important reviews and is committed to bring forward measures to strengthen Canada's regime. The rapidly evolving and complex nature of financial crime requires ongoing changes to improve and modernize Canada's regime. In recent years, the government has brought forward measures to provide tools to support law enforcement and investigations and prosecutions, enhance information sharing, and address risks posed by new technologies and sectors. Since 2019, the government has made investments of $319 million, with close to $50 million ongoing to strengthen data and inform technology resources, financial intelligence, information sharing, and investigative capacity to support money laundering investigations in Canada. Significant funding also went to FINTRAC and the RCMP. Un registre public et consultable.
A public and searchable beneficial ownership registry of federal corporations was launched in January 2024. It will address the use of anonymous Canadian shell companies to conceal the true ownership of property, business, or other valuable assets, with a view to laundering money, avoiding taxes, evading sanctions, or interfering with our democracy. The need for a beneficial ownership registry was a key finding of the FATF's mutual evaluation, the Cullen Commission, and the 2018 parliamentary review of the PCMLTFA. The federal government will continue calling upon provincial and territorial governments to advance a national approach to beneficial ownership transparency. Budget 2023 also announced a suite of legislative and regulatory measures to strengthen the investigative, enforcement, and information sharing tools of Canada's regime. This includes changes to enhance information sharing powers within Finance's portfolio and allow FINTRAC to better support decisions including national security risks, to allow the Minister of Finance to direct reporting entities to undertake enhanced due diligence to help counter risks, including foreign interference, and require the financial sector to report information on sanctioned assets to FINTRAC.
The government took a broad and comprehensive look at Canada's regime and considered many potential measures for its improvement. This included improving operational effectiveness and enforcement outcomes, facilitating greater information sharing, modernizing legislative and regulatory obligations while balancing burden on the private sector, and responding to national and economic security risks that have evolved in the past 2 decades since the PCMLTFA was first enacted, including the risks posed by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The government received 129 written submissions from a wide variety of stakeholders, which indicated strong support for further measures to strengthen Canada's regime to improve operational results. For example, submissions spoke to support for dedicated anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing investigative and prosecutorial resources, and support for the creation of a Canadian Financial Crimes Agency, support for the creation of a corporate beneficial ownership registry, as well as support for greater information sharing, including private-to-private and public-to-private information sharing to detect, deter, and disrupt money laundering and terrorist financing. Many suggestions were also made to strengthen and or modernize criminal justice measures to combat money laundering and terrorist financing, such as proposals to reflect the use of new technologies and address third-party money laundering. Regarding sanctions evasion and threats to the security of Canada, most stakeholders agreed that FINTRAC should be enabled to provide intelligence on these matters, though some were concerned regarding the possible dilution of the PCML-TFA beyond its core focus on anti-money laundering and terrorism financing. Finally, submissions indicated support for taking a risk-based approach to anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing regulation, including to the expansion of the framework to new entities, and many suggestions were also made to improve regulatory compliance and streamline administrative burden while maintaining the intelligence value of reporting to FINTRAC. En résumé, le gouvernement s'est
In summary, the government is committed to continuing to strengthen Canada's regime. The regime seeks to combat money laundering and terrorist financing while respecting the constitutional division of powers, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the privacy rights of Canadians. The regime relies on multiple partners and all levels of government to work collectively to detect and deter and disrupt financial flows. The government has undertaken investments and other measures in recent years to strengthen the framework and respond to evolving risks.
Measures in recent years to strengthen the framework and respond to evolving risks. The parliamentary review of the PCML-TFA provides an important means to continue to improve the regime, and the government is ready to support the Standing Committee of Finance in carrying out the review. Myself, as well as my colleagues, Ms. Hunt and Ms. Davidson, would now be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brazeau and your colleagues for coming before Finance Committee to answering questions.